Husband's fatal betrayal shocks investigators. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the sun barely kisses the sky. Lily sat by the window, sipping her coffee, unaware of the storm brewing in the distance. The air was heavy with the scent of fresh rain, yet something felt wrong. The house, usually filled with the laughter of their children, felt eerily silent. Her husband, Thomas, had been acting strange for days. He'd become distant, his eyes no longer meeting hers. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered, gnawing at her insides. The phone rang, its sharp tone cutting through the stillness. Lily's heart skipped a beat. It was the police. "Mrs. Hargrave, we need you to come down to the station," the voice on the other end said, calm but urgent. Confusion swept over her. What could this be about? At the station, the officers led her to a small, sterile room. The walls seemed to close in on her as she sat, waiting. Her palms were sweaty. A detective entered, his face grave. "We have some questions about your husband, Thomas Hargrave." Lily's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced. Questions? What was going on? The detective continued, his voice steady. "Your husband, he's been hiding something from you?" Lily's pulse quickened. What could he possibly mean? The detective slid a photo across the table. It was a grainy image, blurry but unmistakable. Her husband, Thomas, in the arms of another woman. Lily's stomach churned. The room spun around her, the walls closing in tighter with each passing second. The betrayal hit her like a punch to the gut. But that wasn't the worst part. The detective's next words would haunt her forever. Your husband's affair, it was much more than just a betrayal. It was the motive for his murder. Lily gasped, the air in the room thick with shock. Murder? The detective explained. Thomas had been involved in something far darker than an affair. His lover, a dangerous criminal, had been using him. The betrayal was the trigger for something much deadlier. Lily felt her legs give way beneath her. Her husband was gone, and the shocking truth hit harder than any pain she could have imagined. Her world, once filled with love, had shattered in an instant. Her mind raced. What kind of man was Thomas, really? But the real question lingered in the air. Who had he truly betrayed? And how far would this web of lies stretch? Lily's mind swirled, her thoughts a chaotic mess. Each piece of the puzzle seemed to slip further away, just out of reach. The detective leaned forward, his voice low and steady. We believe Thomas was planning to leave her, but not without consequences. Lily blinked, trying to process the words. Her husband had been planning to escape the grip of a dangerous woman? Her name was Elena. The detective continued, his gaze fixed on Lily's face. She's tied to a group of criminals involved in illegal activities, weapons, money laundering, the works. Lily's stomach twisted in knots. This was a far darker world than she had ever imagined her husband could be part of. Elena had no intentions of letting Thomas go. The detective spoke slowly, as if each word was a hammer driving the reality deeper into Lily's heart. Thomas, he tried to break free. He wanted to expose everything. He paused, letting the weight of the truth sink in. But Elena couldn't let that happen. Lily felt the breath leave her body. Her husband hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been trapped, entangled in a dangerous game. But the pain of betrayal was still there, raw and sharp. She had trusted him. She had loved him. And now, the life they had built was unraveling before her eyes. Everything, the love, the promises, the future they had planned, it had all been a lie. She clenched her fists, anger and sorrow fighting for control. How could she ever look at him the same again? The detective's voice broke through her thoughts. We believe he was going to expose Elena's operation, but she couldn't let that happen. We found evidence of threats, of final confrontation. Thomas never had a chance. Lily's breath caught. The shock hit her again, harder this time. Her husband hadn't just betrayed her. He had betrayed himself. The room grew colder, the air heavy with the finality of it all. Lily could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. Her mind raced. Would she ever find out the full extent of the lies? What had been real? What had been nothing but a facade? And then, in the silence of that sterile room, the true depth of her husband's betrayal settled in. Not just of her, but of his own life. The fatal consequences of the lies he had lived, of the woman he had chosen over everything they had built together. Lily stood up slowly, the detective watching her, waiting. But she no longer knew what to do, where to go. All she could do was leave that room, carrying with her the weight of a broken heart and a shattered life. Lily stood frozen for a moment, the gravity of everything pressing on her like a suffocating cloud. The detective's eyes followed her, but his silence felt like an accusation. With a shaky breath, Lily forced herself to stand tall. She needed to leave. The walls of the station felt too narrow, too confining. She stepped toward the door, her legs heavy, each step like walking through quicksand. Her heart, once filled with love, was now shattered into pieces. Outside, the cool air hit her face, sharp and biting. But it didn't soothe her. It only reminded her of the emptiness inside. She stepped in her car, the engine humming as she drove aimlessly, not knowing where she was going. The streets passed by in a blur, each face in the crowd a stranger. Her thoughts kept circling back to Thomas. How could she have been so blind? How had she missed the signs of the dark web he had woven around them both? Every memory felt tainted now, as if the very foundation of her life had been built on lies. She thought of their wedding day, the vows they had exchanged, promises of forever. But now forever seemed like a cruel joke, and the man she had married, the man she had trusted, had vanished. Lily pulled into the driveway of their home. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. She sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the front door. It seemed impossible that just hours ago, she had been inside, unaware of the betrayal that had been slowly suffocating her life. She took a deep breath and stepped out, the sound of her shoes clicking sharply on the pavement. The door creaked open, and she walked inside, her every step echoing through the hollow halls. It was then that she saw it. The faint glimmer of something on the coffee table. A letter. Lily's pulse quickened. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. It was from Thomas. She opened it slowly, her heart pounding. The words, written in his familiar handwriting, blurred before her eyes. "I'm sorry. I never wanted you to find out like this. Elena, she's dangerous and I thought I could protect you from all of it. But I was wrong. I never should have let it go this far. Please forgive me." The letter was a confession, a desperate cry for redemption. But in those words, Lily found no comfort. Only the bitter sting of truth. Her husband had been caught in a deadly game, and now it was too late. Too late for apologies, too late for redemption. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with regret. She crumpled the letter in her hands, unable to bear the weight of his words any longer. As she let it fall to the floor, Lily realized something chilling. The worst betrayal wasn't just the affair. It was the life they had lived together, a life built on secrets, lies, and a fatal web of danger. Her world had been shattered in one moment, and nothing would ever be the same again. Lily stood in the center of the room, her body rigid, eyes locked on the crumpled letter at her feet. She felt the weight of the house pressing in on her, suffocating her with its silence. The echoes of the past seemed to mock her now. Every corner of the house holding a secret she was only just beginning to uncover. Her breath was shallow, as if the air itself had turned toxic. As the minutes passed, her mind began to race again. The lies, the betrayal, and the murder, it was all too much. It felt as though the truth was constantly slipping through her fingers, just out of reach. Was Thomas truly the man she thought he was? Had their entire life together been one massive deception? Lily's fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, her mind flickering between thoughts. She needed to know more. She had to understand what had happened, what had pushed him to this point of no return. The detective's words from earlier echoed in her mind. "Your husband, he's been hiding something from you." Her hands gripped the phone tighter. Her eyes scanned the contact list, lingering over the name of an old friend, a private investigator she had once hired for a different matter. Without thinking, she dialed the number. The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Lily? Is everything okay? I need your help," she whispered, her voice trembling with raw emotion. "I need to know everything about Thomas. I need to know who he really was." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'll look into it," the investigator replied. "But Lily, be prepared. What I find might not be what you want to hear. Her heart sank. What could he possibly uncover that would change everything yet again? I know, she whispered. I'm ready. The call ended, and Lily was left standing in the center of the room, her mind spiraling. What would she find? The truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing she had left. As the hours passed, Lily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as though the shadows in the house had come alive, moving with a purpose. The wind howled outside, its cold breath seeping through the cracks in the walls. Every creak of the house seemed amplified in the silence, a constant reminder that something was deeply wrong. Then, her phone buzzed. A message from the investigator. Lily opened it, her hands trembling. I found something. It's worse than you think. Her blood ran cold. What could be worse than everything she had already learned? The investigator had attached a file, and as Lily opened it, the first thing she saw was a photograph. It was grainy, dark, and unsettling, but unmistakable. Thomas standing beside Elena. But this time, it wasn't an affair. They weren't just lovers. They were partners in crime. The file revealed more than she could have ever imagined. Hidden accounts, illegal dealings, and a plot that involved not just Thomas, but people far more dangerous than Elena. Her world tilted again, her knees buckling beneath her. Everything had been a lie. Her husband hadn't just betrayed her. He had dragged her into a world of violence, deceit, and blood. Lily's hands shook as she scrolled through the file, her mind reeling with each new revelation. Thomas had been part of something much darker than she had ever known. The air around her felt suffocating, each breath like inhaling broken glass. She wanted to scream, to run, to escape from this nightmare. But there was nowhere to run now. The truth was here, in front of her, and there was no turning back. Lily closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself. She had to face it. She had to find the strength to face the reality that her life, her very identity, had been built on a lie. And as the darkness settled around her, Lily realized that the betrayal wasn't just her husband's. It was hers too. For not seeing the warning signs. For believing in a love that had never been real. The room felt colder now, the silence louder. Lily stood up, her decision made. She had to confront the truth, no matter how devastating. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. Her life was forever changed, and the only way out was through the dark, tangled web of lies that Thomas had left behind. Lily took a deep, shuddering breath, her eyes still glued to the phone screen. The weight of the new revelations hung heavy on her chest, each fact more jarring than the last. She had always thought she knew her husband, Thomas. But now, every memory of their life together felt like a lie, a story someone else had written for her. How had she been so blind? Her thoughts swirled like a storm, each new detail unraveling the fabric of her life. But one thing burned through the haze. She needed answers. Lily grabbed her coat from the back of the chair, her hands moving with a determination she didn't recognize. She couldn't stay here, buried under the weight of these revelations. She had to face it. Whatever the truth was, she had to confront it head on. The drive to the investigator's office felt like an eternity. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with the force. Every turn of the wheel, every stretch of road, brought her closer to the answers she desperately sought. When she arrived, the investigator was waiting outside, his face solemn. He didn't need to say anything. His expression told her everything she needed to know. He handed her a folder, thick with documents. "Everything I could find," he said, his voice low. "It's all here." Thomas was far deeper into this than you could have ever imagined. But there's more. There's someone else. Lily's heart skipped a beat. Someone else? The investigator paused, then continued. Thomas wasn't just trying to escape Elena. There was another player. Someone who knew about the affair, knew about his plan to expose Elena. Lily's mind raced. Another player? Who could that be? The investigator handed her a piece of paper with a name written on it. Jessica Ward. The name struck her like a bolt of lightning. Jessica Ward. She had never heard of her before, but something about the name felt hauntingly familiar. The investigator noticed her reaction. "You know her?" he asked. Lily nodded, though she couldn't remember how. The name lingered in her mind like an old echo. But before she could speak, the investigator added, Jessica Ward is an alias. She's been tied to several shady operations. The deeper we go, the more we realize that Thomas wasn't just a victim. He was part of something much larger. Something dangerous. Lily's pulse quickened. Thomas hadn't just been caught in a web of lies. He had been an active participant in something much darker than she could ever have imagined. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the folder, scanning the pages, searching for more clues. The more she read, the more the truth became clear. Thomas had been living a double life, one that even she hadn't known existed. He had been part of a network that stretched across the city, with ties to dangerous people, people who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who got in their way. The web of deceit and betrayal had extended far beyond just Thomas and Elena. But as Lily pieced the information together, a horrifying realization struck her. The more she uncovered, the closer she came to understanding who was truly behind Thomas's murder. The detectives had been right. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a calculated act, part of a larger plan. And now, Lily was caught in the middle of it all. She had no choice but to follow this path, to confront the shadows that had been hiding in the corners of her life. The truth, as painful and devastating as it was the only way forward. Lily felt a cold chill run down her spine as she realized the depth of her own involvement. She was tied to this whether she liked it or not. The darkness of the truth had found her, and now there was no escaping it. The questions that had haunted her about Thomas, about Elena, about everything were beginning to have answers. But the answers came at a cost. The further she dug, the more she understood how far the betrayal ran. And with each new revelation, Lily knew she was walking toward a final, deadly confrontation. There was no turning back now. The truth had shattered her world, but it also held the key to something much larger. Something that would change everything. Lily's mind raced with the implications of everything she had just uncovered. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but the picture they formed was darker than she could have ever imagined. Jessica Ward, the name from the investigator's file, seemed to echo in her mind, a phantom haunting her thoughts. What was her connection to Thomas? To Elena? Why had she been pulling strings from the shadows all along? The investigator's words still echoed in Lily's ears. Asterisk, you're tied to this, whether you like it or not. Asterisk. Lily's fingers trembled as she flipped through the remaining pages of the folder. A photograph caught her attention, a blurry image of Thomas and a woman. It was hard to make out the details, but there was something about the woman's posture, the way she stood so close to him. And then, her heart skipped a beat. Lily realized who the woman was. It was Jessica Ward. Her stomach churned. Jessica had been part of the plan all along. But what was her role? Lily's breath became shallow as the truth began to take shape. Jessica wasn't just an accomplice. She was the one who had been orchestrating everything behind the scenes. Thomas, caught in the web of lies and manipulation, had been nothing more than a pawn. The betrayal cut deeper now, the realization that Thomas had been completely consumed by this dark world. But Lily wasn't done yet. She had to find out who else was involved. The investigator watched her closely as she stood up, her mind made up. I need to confront her, Lily said, her voice steady but filled with determination. The investigator shook his head. No, Lily. It's too dangerous. We need to go to the authorities, get the police involved. This is bigger than you think. But Lily didn't hear him. Her thoughts were already racing ahead, already envisioning the confrontation with Jessica. She couldn't just sit back and wait. She needed answers. Answers that only Jessica could give. Lily grabbed her purse, her eyes filled with a cold resolve. I'm going to find her. I'll end this, one way or another. The investigator's voice cracked with urgency. You're making a mistake. This isn't just about Thomas anymore. You're walking into a nest of vipers. But Lily had made up her mind. The woman she had once loved, the man she had once trusted, they were gone. The life she thought she knew had been a lie, a smokescreen hiding the darkness beneath. There was no turning back. Lily left the investigator's office and stepped into her car, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but her resolve was unwavering. She knew she had to face Jessica Ward. She couldn't allow herself to remain in the dark any longer. As she drove through the city streets, a sense of foreboding settled over her. The streets that once felt so familiar now seemed alien, their shadows longer, their corners darker. Every passing car, every flicker of streetlight felt like a threat. The location in the investigator's file led her to an industrial part of town, far from the bustling heart of the city. The buildings here were old, decaying, abandoned, just the kind of place where someone like Jessica could hide. Lily's breath caught as she parked her car in front of an old warehouse, its windows shattered, the doors slightly ajar. This was it. This was where everything had been leading. She stepped out of the car, her legs shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. Each step toward the warehouse felt like a step toward the unknown. But there was no turning back now. The door creaked as she pushed it open, the darkness inside swallowing her whole. Her pulse raced in her ears as she stepped inside, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the vast, empty space. And then she saw her. Jessica Ward stood at the far end of the warehouse, her figure silhouetted against the dim light filtering in through the broken windows. Her cold, calculating gaze met Lily's as she took a slow step forward. Lily's voice was steady, though her heart hammered in her chest. "You've been pulling the strings all along, haven't you?" Jessica's lips curled into a faint smile. "You're much more perceptive than I gave you credit for." The air seemed to thicken as the truth hung between them, the tension building with every second. Lily's fists clenched at her sides. She had come this far, and she would get the answer she needed, no matter what. Jessica stepped closer, her presence unsettling, like a shadow that could swallow everything. "You really think you can change anything now?" she said, her voice laced with amusement. "It's already too late for that, Lily." And then, the silence shattered. A loud bang echoed through the warehouse. Lily's heart froze as her mind raced. This was it, the final confrontation. Lily's body went rigid as the sound of the gunshot echoed through the warehouse, the sharp crack reverberating in her chest. Her breath caught in her throat, her mind unable to process what had just happened. The dim light in the warehouse flickered as her heart raced, fear rising within her. She instinctively ducked behind a rusted steel pillar, her breath shallow, barely able to control her trembling hands. "Did you really think you could just walk in here and demand answers?" Jessica's voice cut through the silence, cold and mocking. Lily's pulse thudded in her ears as she peeked around the corner, her eyes scanning the dark corners of the room for any sign of movement. "You're too late," Jessica continued, her voice steady, like she was enjoying the game. "Everything is already in motion. You can't stop it now." Lily's mind raced. She didn't know if Jessica was threatening her or if there was more at stake. If the people Jessica was working with were already on their way to make sure she didn't get out of here alive. Lily had one choice: confront Jessica, or risk being trapped in this nightmare forever. She gritted her teeth and stepped out from behind the pillar, her eyes fixed on the silhouette of Jessica in the distance. Her voice was trembling, but filled with a fierce resolve. "You don't get to win. I won't let you destroy everything." Jessica's laugh rang out, dark and unsettling. "You think you have any control here?" With a smooth, practiced motion, Jessica raised the gun again, aiming it directly at Lily. For a brief moment, Lily thought her heart might stop beating. Then Jessica froze. The sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, came from behind. Lily's eyes widened in confusion. Before either woman could react, two figures emerged from the shadows. A man and a woman, their faces cloaked in darkness. One of them spoke with an air of authority. "Put the gun down, Jessica. It's over." Jessica's expression faltered for just a moment, as if she was considering her options. But then, a smile crept across her face. "You think you can just walk in here and take control of this situation?" she spat. "This was never about you. It was always about something bigger than any of us." Lily took a cautious step back, her body tensing, the situation spiraling out of her control. But she was too far gone to retreat now. Her entire life had been destroyed, and now, here she was face to face with the people who had torn it all apart. The man in the shadows stepped forward, his presence dominating the room. "Lily," he said, his voice low, smooth. "We didn't want it to come to this. But Jessica, she's not someone you can control." Lily's head spun. What was he talking about? Who were these people? Jessica laughed again, bitterly. "You think you can stop me? After all the work I've done? After all the people I've pulled into this mess? You're too late." The tension in the room thickened, every breath hanging heavy with the weight of their words. Lily couldn't understand it. How had it all gone so wrong? How had Thomas been so deeply involved in something so dangerous, so far beyond what she had ever imagined? The man with the authoritative voice looked at Lily with something almost like pity. "You're in over your head, sweetheart. Thomas's death, it was never just about him. It was always a part of something bigger. The people behind this, they won't stop until everything is complete." Lily felt the blood drain from her face. What were they talking about? Was Thomas's death just the beginning? Suddenly, the woman with the man stepped forward, a grim expression on her face. "The truth about Thomas isn't what you think. He was never innocent. This whole thing, it was orchestrated long before you ever suspected anything." The words hit Lily like a punch to the gut. What had Thomas really been involved in? How far had he gone? The man continued, his tone relentless. "We gave him an out. He could have walked away, but he made his choice. And now, there's no going back." Lily's breath hitched, her body shaking. This was it. She had uncovered the truth, but now it was too late. Her mind raced. She needed a way out, but the walls were closing in. "I won't be part of your game," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, but filled with a steely resolve. "I'm not going to let you ruin any more lives. Not mine. Not anyone's." For a moment, the room was silent. The man and the woman exchanged a look, something dark, something calculating. But then, the man stepped forward and nodded to Jessica. "Take care of her." In an instant, everything erupted into chaos. Jessica lunged toward Lily, the gun raised. But before she could react, Lily's instincts kicked in. She ducked, her body moving on pure adrenaline. A struggle ensued, the gun slipping from Jessica's grasp as they both fell to the cold, concrete floor. Lily scrambled to her feet, heart pounding in her ears. She didn't know where the strength came from, but she knew she couldn't stop now. She had to survive. She grabbed the gun, her fingers wrapping around it with a force she didn't even know she had. And then, in one fluid motion, she turned the weapon on the shadowy figures in the room, her voice sharp and defiant. "Stay back. Stay the hell away from me." In that moment, Lily realized something chilling. She was no longer the woman who had walked into this warehouse. She had become someone else, someone who would fight for her life. Lily's hands shook, but the gun in her grasp felt like the only thing that could keep her grounded. Her breathing was rapid, her heart hammering in her chest, but she held her ground. The two figures stood frozen, watching her with a mix of surprise and calculation. They hadn't expected this. The woman, her face now visible in the dim light, smirked. "You're not as helpless as I thought," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But you're still out of your depth." Lily didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the woman and the man, scanning for any sign of movement. She could feel the weight of the gun, the cold metal a reminder of just how much had changed in an instant. She didn't know what to do next. Her mind raced through every possibility, every outcome. Her life, her marriage, everything she thought she knew, had been shattered. But there was one thing Lily knew for certain. She was not going to die here. Not today. The man took a slow, deliberate step toward her. His voice was low, calm, but it sent a chill down her spine. "You don't have what it takes to finish this, Lily." His words hit her like a slap. He was right. She didn't have the power, the connections, or the knowledge to take down whatever dark force they represented. But Lily had something else. She had desperation, and that, in the end, was all she needed. With a sudden movement, she bolted for the exit, her feet pounding against the concrete floor. The sound of her heart thudding in her chest drowned out everything else. She could hear their footsteps behind her, but she didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. The door was just ahead. Her lungs burned with each step, but she pushed harder, faster. The cold air from outside grew closer with every stride. And then, she was free. She burst through the door, her legs nearly giving way as she stumbled into the open air. The night was thick with shadows, but there was no time to stop. She had to get away. The sound of cars, distant and muffled, reached her ears. Her mind whirled with thoughts of escape, of getting far enough away from this nightmare to breathe again. Lily didn't dare stop to look behind her. She ran, driven by a single thought: survival. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the icy air biting at her skin as she sprinted down the street. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't care, as long as it was away from them, away from the truth that had torn her life apart. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it. She had no time for anyone. No time for anyone but herself. The sound of footsteps grew fainter, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lily dared to hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had outsmarted them. But then, a car screeched to a halt beside her. Before she could react, the door swung open. The man from the warehouse stepped out, his cold eyes locking onto hers. "You're not getting away that easily," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. Lily's heart plummeted. There was no escape. She could feel the weight of the gun in her hand once more. But she knew it wouldn't be enough. Her world began to tilt, the ground beneath her seeming to shift, as the man took a step forward. His hand reached out, grabbing her wrist with a vice-like grip. "You're coming with us," he said, his words final, relentless. And as the darkness closed in around her, Lily realized something terrifying. The truth was never going to set her free. The game was rigged from the start, and there was no way out. Lily's world narrowed to a single point, the grip on her wrist cold and unyielding. Her breath caught in her throat as the man dragged her toward the car. She tried to resist, to fight back, but the force of his pull was overwhelming. Panic surged through her veins, but she couldn't think straight. Her mind scrambled for a way out, for anything that could break her free. Her gaze darted around, desperate for an escape route. The car's headlights cast long shadows on the street, illuminating the scene like a cruel spotlight. Every streetlight, every building seemed to blur together as Lily's heart raced, threatening to burst from her chest. The man shoved her into the back seat of the car with brutal efficiency, slamming the door shut behind her. Before she could react, another figure slid into the front seat, a woman who had been waiting quietly in the shadows. Lily's mind was spinning. Who were these people? What had they done to Thomas, to Elena, to her entire life? The car sped down the dark streets, the hum of the engine the only sound in the suffocating silence. The cold, hard reality of the situation hit her all at once. She was trapped, but even in the depths of her fear, something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to let this happen. She couldn't. Her eyes scanned the car, searching for any weapon, any opportunity to break free. The man in the front seat glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "You don't get to make the rules anymore, Lily," he said, his voice steady. "You're part of this now, whether you like it or not." Lily's chest tightened with rage and fear, but she forced herself to keep calm. She couldn't let them see her desperation. She had to think. The woman in the front seat turned to face her. "You're lucky you even have a choice," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Most people don't get that." Lily's mind raced. Her eyes locked onto the door handle, her fingers twitching with the urge to grab it. She couldn't stay in this car. She couldn't let them take her to wherever they were going. Without warning, she reached for the handle. She threw herself against the door, pushing with all the strength she could muster. But before she could pull it open, the man in the front seat snapped. "Don't even think about it." His hand shot back to grab her arm, his grip tight and unrelenting. The car swerved dangerously as the woman turned to face him. "Keep your hands off her." The tension in the car was palpable, the air thick with unspoken threats. Lily's heart raced, her mind still scrambling for a way to survive. She was running out of options, but she wasn't ready to give up. "Why?" she whispered, her voice shaking with anger. "Why did you do this? Why kill him? Why drag me into this?" The man didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the road, but his jaw tightened slightly, as if grappling with the question. Thomas was a liability, he said finally. He knew too much, and he was getting sloppy. But you're different. You're smarter than that. Lily's pulse quickened. Smarter? You think I'm just going to work for you? Be your pawn. The woman in the front seat smirked. You don't have a choice. You never did. Lily felt the weight of those words. She had always been a prisoner to her own life, trusting Thomas, believing in a future that was nothing more than a lie. Now, she was truly trapped. But as the car continued to speed through the night, a thought flickered in her mind, a single, desperate hope. Maybe she didn't have to be the one who made a choice. Maybe the choice would be made for her. And as the car took another turn, a sharp, brutal idea formed in her mind. Maybe she could make them think she was broken, think she was under control. Maybe that was the only way to get out alive. She turned her eyes toward the man in the front seat, keeping her face calm, her voice even. I'll do whatever you want, she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. I'll work with you. Just let me go. For a moment, there was silence. Then the man glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes hard, but there was a flicker of something, uncertainty. It was a crack in his armor, a momentary doubt. Lily knew she had to exploit that crack to keep them off balance long enough to make her move. The car turned another corner, and Lily's gaze shifted to the woman beside her. The woman was watching her closely, but there was a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation in her posture. Lily knew that it was now or never. The car's headlights suddenly illuminated something up ahead, a dark alley, shrouded in shadows. The perfect place. As they neared the alley, Lily's fingers tightened around the door handle again. She was ready. The moment she was close enough, she would make her move. Her mind was clear now. She wasn't going to die here. Not like this. Lily's pulse thundered in her ears as the alley grew closer, the darkness swallowing the car whole. Her fingers tightened around the cold metal of the door handle, ready for the perfect moment. The car slowed, the tires humming against the rough pavement as they approached the alley's mouth. Lily's breath caught. This was it. The man in the front seat glanced at her in the rearview mirror again, his gaze narrowing, suspicious. Something was off. He could sense it. The woman beside him also seemed to stiffen, her eyes flicking toward Lily. But neither of them knew. Lily was no longer the terrified woman they had trapped. As the car slowed further, approaching the entrance of the alley, Lily made her move. With a swift, fluid motion, she grabbed the door handle and yanked it open, throwing herself into the cold night air. For a split second, everything seemed to slow down, her body weightless, her senses heightened. She heard the screech of the car's tires as the man slammed on the brakes, shouting for her to stop. But Lily didn't stop. She didn't look back. She rolled into the alley, her body scraping against the rough pavement. But she forced herself to her feet immediately. The sound of the car doors opening, the crunch of footsteps following her, filled the air. But Lily wasn't waiting for them. She darted through the alley, her legs pumping faster than she ever thought possible, adrenaline fueling every step. Her heart raced, but now it was driven by something stronger than fear, by the raw, undeniable need to escape. The alley twisted ahead, dark and narrow, but Lily didn't hesitate. She pushed on, knowing every second brought her closer to freedom. Behind her, she heard the voices, shouting, ordering her to stop. But they were growing fainter, drowned out by the pounding of her own heartbeat. Her chest burned, her lungs screaming for air, but she didn't slow. She couldn't. Suddenly, a light flickered ahead. Lily squinted into the darkness, recognizing the outline of a street. She was almost there. She pushed harder, her legs a blur beneath her, as the alley opened up into the wider streets. And then freedom. The street lights were brighter here, the distant sounds of city life just beginning to stir. Lily turned sharply into the street, weaving through the sparse cars and pedestrians. Her body was trembling from the effort, but there was no time to stop. She had to keep moving. In the distance, she saw a convenience store, its bright fluorescent lights flickering. Without thinking, she rushed inside, her breathing ragged, her mind still reeling from what had just happened. The clerk behind the counter glanced up, startled by her sudden entrance, but Lily barely registered him. She approached the payphone at the back, her fingers trembling as she dialed. She knew she needed help. Someone who could get her out of this. Someone who could get her far away from the nightmare she had narrowly escaped. The phone rang, the sound echoing in her ears, until finally, "Hello." Lily's voice cracked as she spoke, barely able to contain the desperation. "It's me. I need you. Please. I need to get out of here now." The voice on the other end was calm, steady. "Where are you?" Lily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't know, some alley off Main Street. I think they're still looking for me." She didn't need to explain further. Her contact knew. "Stay there. We'll be there soon. Just don't move. Don't trust anyone." Lily's heart thudded in her chest as the line went dead. She hung up and backed away from the phone, her eyes scanning the store nervously. She couldn't stay here long, not with them still out there, hunting her down. Her mind raced. What if they found her? What if they'd already closed in? But before she could think further, the door to the store swung open. Lily froze, her breath catching. Two figures stepped inside. She didn't recognize them, but they moved with purpose, scanning the store. Her blood ran cold. Had they found her already? But then, one of them glanced directly at her. "Are you Lily?" Lily's heart stopped. How did they know her name? She tried to stay calm, to hide the panic rising inside her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaking. The man smiled, a cold, almost friendly smile. "We're here to help. Let's go." Lily stared at him, trying to gauge if this was another trap. But as his eyes met hers, she saw something she hadn't seen before, genuine concern. The other figure, a woman, stepped forward, her expression grim but reassuring. "We're with you, Lily. You're not alone anymore." Lily hesitated for a moment, but then something inside her shifted. She had no choice. The world she had known was gone. This was the only path left. With one last glance around the store, Lily nodded. She didn't trust them completely. Not yet, but she had no other option. "Okay," she said, her voice low but determined. "Let's go." And as she followed them into the night, she realized this was only the beginning. Lily's footsteps echoed in the quiet streets as she followed the two figures, her mind still racing. The woman led the way, walking with a steady, confident pace, while the man lingered just behind, casting occasional glances over his shoulder. Lily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound felt amplified, and she couldn't help but wonder who, or what, was tracking her now. The night air was thick with tension, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Her heart still pounded in her chest, the adrenaline still pulsing through her veins. But despite the fear gnawing at her, she knew something had changed. There was a faint glimmer of hope now, something she hadn't felt in days. The woman turned a corner without a word, and Lily followed, her breath catching as they passed through a narrow alley and into a dimly lit parking lot. It was empty, save for a sleek black SUV parked in the far corner. The woman walked straight toward it, pulling the car keys from her pocket. The man stepped forward, keeping an eye on the surroundings, scanning the area with sharp, trained eyes. Lily's mind was still in chaos, but the sight of the SUV, the promise of escape, brought a wave of urgency. She didn't want to think about what might happen next, only about getting away from everything. The woman unlocked the car and opened the door, motioning for Lily to get in. "Get in. We'll talk inside." Lily hesitated for a moment. She wanted to ask so many questions about who they were, what they knew, why they were helping her, but she didn't have time. They were on the move again, and fast. She slid into the back seat, the leather cool against her skin, and the door slammed shut behind her. As the car roared to life, the woman in the driver's seat glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Stay quiet. Stay low. We're not safe yet." The man took the passenger seat, his eyes never leaving the rearview mirror, scanning the streets as they pulled out of the lot and onto the road. The world outside the car seemed to blur, the streets twisting into an indistinct haze as they drove faster, further from the danger. Lily tried to settle, to calm the storm inside her, but her mind was still trapped in the moments before, the warehouse, the betrayal, the chase. Her hand subconsciously gripped the edge of the seat as she fought to contain the flood of emotions threatening to drown her. How could she ever trust anyone again? How could she have been so blind? She stole a glance at the man beside her. His expression was unreadable, distant, but there was something in the way he held himself. Something dangerous. The woman in the front seat caught her gaze in the mirror again. We're heading to a safe house. You'll be safe there. Just keep your head down and stay out of sight. They'll be looking for you. Lily nodded, but her thoughts were racing. They'd been looking for her since the moment she ran from the alley, since the moment she discovered the truth about Thomas. I don't understand, she finally said, her voice hoarse. Why are you helping me? The woman's eyes flicked to her again, then quickly back to the road. Because we can't afford for you to be a liability. You're in this now, Lily. You know too much. There's no going back. Lily's stomach churned. No going back. The words haunted her as she thought about the life she'd once known, the life she thought she understood. She thought of Thomas, of everything they had built together. Now it all felt like a lie. The man in the passenger seat turned slightly, his eyes locking with hers. You're not the only one who's been lied to, he said, his voice low and heavy with meaning. You're not the only one who's been betrayed. Lily couldn't meet his gaze. There was too much she didn't know, too much she had yet to uncover. The car sped through the streets, and as they turned onto a quieter road, Lily felt the weight of the silence between them. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. Her mind was still reeling, but the words the man had spoken lingered in her ears. Was she really the only one betrayed? For the first time, she considered the possibility that these strangers, these people who had just come into her life, might not be the enemy after all. But that didn't mean she trusted them. They pulled up to a large, secluded house at the edge of town. The lights were off, and the area was eerily quiet. Lily's heart skipped a beat. It was too quiet. Stay here, the woman said, her voice firm but soft. We'll make sure the coast is clear. You stay inside. We'll come for you. The man got out of the car first, glancing around carefully. The woman followed, leaving Lily alone in the back seat, still processing everything. Lily stared at the house through the tinted window. Was this where she'd find the answers? Was this where her life would begin again? She didn't know, but for the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe this was her chance to rewrite the story. Lily sat alone in the car, the silence pressing down on her as the minutes dragged by. She could feel the weight of everything she had been through, betrayal, fear, and a constant, gnawing uncertainty. But now, as she watched the dark house in front of her, something within her began to settle. This was it, the turning point. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she had no choice but to walk through the door. She couldn't keep running forever. It was time to confront the truth. The sound of the door opening broke her thoughts. The woman appeared first, her eyes scanning the surroundings before she waved Lily to follow. Lily took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. Her legs felt shaky, but she steadied herself, determined not to let fear control her anymore. The house was dark, the only light coming from a small, dim porch lamp that flickered against the night. The air was still, too still, as if the world was holding its breath. Inside, the woman led her down a long hallway, their footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. Lily could feel the heaviness of the house, like a presence that had lingered for years. They stopped at a door, and the woman turned to face her. This is where you'll stay for now, she said. Rest. You need it. Lily nodded but said nothing. There was no comfort in the offer, no solace in the empty room she was led into. It was a place of refuge, yes, but it was also a prison. Thank you, Lily whispered, but the words didn't feel enough. She wasn't sure what she was thanking them for. Maybe for keeping her alive, maybe for giving her a place to hide, or maybe for giving her a chance to breathe. The woman smiled faintly and stepped back, closing the door softly behind her. Lily stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space. She was safe for now, but she couldn't stop thinking of everything she had lost. And yet, as the moonlight filtered through the window, casting soft shadows across the floor, Lily realized that for the first time in a long while, she was still here. She was still alive, and as long as she had breath in her lungs, she would keep fighting. For the truth. for herself, and for the future she would one day rebuild. The past may have broken her, but it would not define her. Not anymore. With quiet determination, she turned away from the door, ready to face whatever came next.